Yes, bro. Noted accordingly. For the history of present illness, we have 8 months prior to consult, patient noted in tendencies amounting to half glance with intermittent epigastric pain, no other associated symptoms, sought consult at a private hospital, and was advised admission. Patient refused due to financial constraints. 5 months prior to consult, still with above symptoms, sought consult at RBR and was subsequently admitted. Patient underwent EGD plus colonoscopy plus biopsy, which revealed gastric adenocarcinoma and underwent 4 cycles of chemotherapy. Patient is now on HD day 136 and was scheduled for the said procedure. Past medical history, gastric adenocarcinoma, diagnosed last 2023, status post 4 cycles of chemotherapy. No history of type 2 DM, hypertension, broken asthma, and so on. For the personal and social history, no known allergies to food nor medications, previous 4.5 active smoker, occasional alcoholic beverage drinker, no illicit drug use, and no change in stool caliber. For the laboratories, we have a hemoglobin of 102, hematocrit of 0.33. Overall, laboratories are all within normal limits except for the electrolytes. Notable is sodium with a value of 129.8. For the chest X-ray, follow-up sitting chest examination dated April 7 shows slight clearing of hazy opacities in the right mid and both lower lungs ascribed to pneumonia. For the EGD plus colonoscopy result, gastric mass, noted gastric mass, probably maintenance at this post-biopsy. And then the history erosive esophagitis, grade C, hernia, heel, grade 2. For the appearances, INCP of moderate risk, IN nephro of no objections, and IN pulmo of high risk. Due to pneumonia po. 45-year-old male po. Yes po ma'am. It's based on actual case po. For the physical examination, the patient was seen at the phase 9 male ward, conscious, coherent, not in distress, with the following vital signs. Stable vital signs, BUMA. For the anthropometrics, 47 kg, 170 cm male, BMI of 16.3, allowable blood loss of 320 cc. For the notable physical examination, possible chest expansion, clear with sounds, no interactions, soft non-distended non-tender abdomen, fully pulses, no edema. ASA 3, airway assessment of good airway assessment to Malampati 1, good mouth opening, and good dental delivery. For the anesthetic plan, RSI plus CLEB, key medications as follows: midazolam of 1 to 2 mg IV, tranexamine 1 gram IV. For the agents used during the case, pentapropofol salts and atapurium, O2C, go to maintain. At the OR, patient was hooked to the monitor with the following vital signs: a BP of 110/70, a heart rate of 105, respiratory rate of 20 cycles per minute. O2 of 100% via face mask at 5 LPM. Patient was placed on left lateral decubitus position and sepsis and sepsis was done. Local infiltration with lidocaine 2%. 3 cc was given. A 2 needle PH18 was inserted at the alveolar corner space. Epidural catheter was inserted at the level of L3 Test dose was given and it was noted to be negative. Patient was placed back to supine position. IJ catheter insertion was planned to be inserted first, but patient was noted to be agitated and was coughing. Patient was then decided to induce the patient via Jetta RSI with the following agents, as mentioned earlier. Prior to induction of Jetta RSI. pre-evaluation room. Intermittent na po during after insertion into the patient was then given 50 micrograms of fentanyl and 70 milligrams of propofol. Upon initiation of syringe maneuver, black tardigastic fluid was then regurgitated. Patient's head was immediately turned lateral. Suction of umbilicus was done. Patient then immediately intubated. Post-induction BS as follows: BP of 95/60, heart rate of 110, O2 sat of 100%. Approximately 750 cc black fluid was suction. Clear blood sounds noted with notable decreased blood sounds on the right nasal fluid. Procedure continued. Central line and NDT inserted. BS of 90/60, heart rate of 103, and then RR assisted and then O2 sat of 100%. Intraoperatively, tube and NDT suction every 15 minutes. 1 hour to the procedure, approximately a total of 1,500 cc black tardigastic fluid was suction. 1 hour to the procedure, noted negative secretions of the still with clear and equal red sounds, stable vital signs. Rest of the procedure was uneventful. Delayed extubation plan.
Was this discussed in M&M, time? No mortality ba ito?
It was discussed before.
Na-discuss? Kailan yan to?
Last year po, under...
Discuss na. So this is not your case? Whose case?
I don't know.
Kanino?
Doc Castro's case.
Doc?
Hani Castro. Doc Castro. Doc Hani.
Sure.
Delayed extubation was planned, main service informed, and then for the summary of the procedure, final diagnosis, gastric outlet obstruction, upper intestinal deepness and indirect gastric adenocarcinoma stage 4 with hepatic metastasis. Status post-laparotomy, distal gastrostomy will one reconstruction, one duration of 4 hours and 20 minutes, fluids infused with 3,000 cc crystalloids, estimated blood loss of 180 cc, allowable blood loss of 20 cc, bring output of 550 cc per hour, transfused with immune proper DC, and with a total of 2 liters of black tardigastic fluid suction overall.
The question is, during the, did you see, there was a desaturation in crop. Did you see that? What happened?
According to discussing the case with Dr. Hanipon, there was no noted desaturation.
There was no desaturation in crop. So, okay, so the diagnosis of aspiration was, ano namatay ko? Hindi naman.
For the discussion, the incidence of clinically significant pulmonary aspiration is highest for emergency procedures, approximately 1 in 600 to 800, and relatively rare during elective procedures of 1 in 2,100 to 3,500. The mortality rate is associated with aspiration is 1 in 45,000 to 70,000 across a large variety of patient populations. The incidence of aspiration is higher in the presence of ABS, obstructive emergencies, and light planes of anesthesia. Regurgitation and aspiration are most common during induction of anesthesia and laryngoscopy. So for the predisposing factors for aspiration, we have emergency surgeries, inadequate anesthesia, abdominal pathology, most likely this was the case as presented earlier, obesity, opioid medication, neurologic deficit, autonomy, difficult intubation or airway, reflux, and hiatal hernia. As was as was seen in the EGD and colonoscopy result, patient was noted with hiatal-hernia and hernia.
So, among this, what are the risk factors
For the
in the
case
patient?
presented earlier, most probable factors will be abdominal pathology, opiate delegation, and hiatal-hernia. It's not clear to see. Ayos ko siya.
What happened during the second procedure versus the procedure we did the colonoscopy? Why did it happen in the second OR, the aspiration, and not during the colonoscopy?
Probably the use of opiate delegation. For example, the EGD colonoscopy was done for sedation. Most probably the agency's opiate was not a factor. That was not given. So the only difference I can see.
Nung una, the patient underwent EGD and colonoscopy, or the any imaging done before doing the EGD colonoscopy. Or was she already diagnosed with gastric mass at that time?
Was already diagnosed with gastric mass at the time.
What is the importance of knowing a patient with a gastric mass?
Just for aspiration. There is risk.
Yes. Having that mass itself is already aspiration. So my question is ngayon, what would be the difference between yung AGD siya and yung itong prospectively? Why did he suddenly aspirate on his second procedure and not during the first procedure?
Most likely the agency's procedure. If the lower esophageal tone or the upper esophageal tone was pressure was more, the resting pressure according to Spanish pressure is around 30 to 100 and 10 to 30 respectively. If the pressure will decrease during time of induction, most likely like relax to sphincter closure and then aspirate for that.
Was the patient agitated during the second procedure?
Yes, agitated user. So patient was probably given
anxious and agitated. What does a person do?
give anxiolytics user.
Hindi, ano yung ginagawa ng patient? What happens to a patient when he's agitated, anxious, nervous? Pag mag-exam ka, mag-oral exam ka or what, di ba kinakabahan ka? You tend to retch, you become agitated. Can that be a reason why this time?
Probably user. That's why there was instance of intermittent coughing
Di ba
user.
kasi suddenly, yung dumating siya, were you report of agitation or what? And then after you gave your epidural catheter, the patient was put on spine, remove siya ng inubo. Were there no sedation during the insertion of the epidural catheter?
It
Was
was
any
not
anxiolysis?
explicitly stated user upon also with RIs.
Kasi in their perspective, isipin mo, pareho lang naman ikaw na nagbigay ng opioid. If the patient underwent sedation during the colonoscopy, so ang bago ngayon dito sa ORT, kung nagbigay ka din naman ng opioid, sabi mo, then suddenly doon na siya nag- diba?
So probably the medications given during
Tapos the patient was anxious, kaya siya nagsuka na
Yes,
Is
yes,
it?
yes,
Diba? Pwede ba ito na patient mo sa
yes,
is there tranquilizing prior to
yes, sir. Probable po, sir.
sige, may ito ang case kung may gastric mass. Is it okay to do IV sedation during the EGD and colonoscopy? Will you be comfortable doing it under IV sedation?
Mild induced pass.
Mild sedation, tranquilizing, or will you just do it under GA?
With the gastric mass. No, sir. Not local with lidocaine spray.
Local.
Yes, sir.
Kasi we have cases before, patient with gastric mass under IV sedation, gastric acid. So we decided to do on yung mga sumunod na cases referred to me, I usually have it done under GSM. Ewan ko kay ma'am. Patient no gastric mass daw, and then they schedule them for EGD colonoscopy. Kasi I have before, yung kay-event, ginapa. The gastric mass, that they EGD colonoscopy. Yes. Kaya yung mga sumunod na, we perform under GA na. Yes.
Again, I never thought there was coughing. So the coughing is already a bad sign. You do not induce a patient who is coughing. You have to look into that, what's causing that.
Yes, sir.
Nandun na siya eh. Kasi pagka-induce sa siya nag-aspirin.
It was covered in the crisis management guidelines. We will discuss that later on.
Sige, when you will be discussing this, you always have to go back to the patient.
Yes, ma'am.
Relate what you're reading to what were the findings in the patient. That is applicable in what you're saying to our patient.
For the normal physiological mechanisms, passive reflux and regurgitation of gastric contents is normally prevented by the LES, and then diseases that affect LES stone, such are hiatal hernia, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and so on. So for our case, as mentioned earlier, hiatal hernia was diagnosed through EGD and colonoscopy, and then elevated intra-abdominal pressures such as laparoscopy, abdominal compartment syndrome, and raised gastric pressure overwhelming the LES and provoke reflux. The presence of an esogastric tube.
Doc, huwag mo kausapin yung computer, huwag kausapin mo kami. Sige na. Kailangan may eye contact dito. Para once in a while, you have to glance. Kasi you are talking to yourself na to us. Kaya tuloy mo lang nakikinig. Sige na, and make it slow. Okay ka naman sa presentation na. Just do it slow so that others will be able to get something from what you are presenting. Sayang mo.
Let's go on. The presence of an esogastric tube also decreases LES pressure and increases episodes of reflux. Opioids and antimuscarinics also reduces LES tone and has no hormonal changes in pregnancy. An impaired level of consciousness also interferes with the upper airway reflexes and is also associated with reduced LES tone and delayed gastric emptying. Factors that reduce upper esophageal sphincter tone, otherwise increasing risk for aspiration are the following. For the anesthetic drugs, we have volatile agents, benzodiazepines, opioids, and propofol. For neuronal dysfunction, we have the following: stroke, Parkinson's disease, and myasthenia gravis. For aging, upper esophageal sphincter compliance also increases while tone decreases. Using sedation and muscle relaxants, sedative drugs and muscle relaxants depresses the reflexes and UVS muscle tone. Supine position also facilitates regurgitation and pooling of solutions. For the next next part, we have the factors that increases LVS pressure, which also increases risk for aspiration. For medications, we have opioids such as morphine and fentanyl, thiopental, propofol, anticholinergics such as atropine and volatile anesthetics. For physiologic conditions, we have pregnancy, obesity, GERD, hiatal hernia, and increased intra-abdominal pressure. For the clinical features, immediate recognition as follows. This is according to the practice management manual for aspiration. There is a sudden desaturation, drop in autosaturation, coughing as mentioned earlier, and as noted 4.9, choking or visible gastric contents in the airway, bronchospasm, wheezing, increased airway pressures, tachycardia, hypotension, and then crackles or decreased blood sounds upon auscultation. For the case in question, we have coughing was evident as after epidural administration, crackles or decreased blood sounds upon auscultation after RSI induction was also noted. So for signs of aspiration, based on book description, laryngospasm or airway obstruction, bronchospasm, wheezes, and crackles. Noted hypoventilation, dyspnea, and apnea, and then also reduced compliance. Noted desaturation, bradycardia, and arrest. For the management, first and foremost, inform the surgeon, and then head down, Trendelenburg position, lateral pulse curve if feasible, and then apply vapor pressure. And then you should try to clear and suction the airway, give 100% oxygen, and then consider deepening anesthesia to visualize and clear the pharynx or airway. Try gentle mask CPAP or intermittent positive pressure ventilation with vapor pressure. However, if you cannot ventilate, give salts and atropine, and then intubate with liquid pressure, and then expedite the surgery. For further care, sedation, analgesia, and intermittent positive pressure ventilation via tube, and then suction the airway, optimize FiOD, and breathe. You may also do bronchoscopy and lavage if necessary, bronchodilators as necessary, and if saturation is adequate, there are two possible outcomes. If stable after 2 hours in recovery, sent to the ward and arrange for follow-up. If unstable or saturation is inadequate, maintain intubation and intermittent pressure ventilation and admit to a high dependency area. Intubated po siya po sa delay ko. However, after most of the 3 extubated intubation. For the prevention,
the patient was post-op intubated because akala ko nag-operation
intraop naman po siya, it was not remarkable. However, it was not necessarily
post-op. Kasi tignan mo yung algorithm mo. Sabi mo, stable. Saturation adequate exit. It's stable after 2 hours. Recovery, send to the ward, and arrange follow-up.
After the case it was deemed necessary when there are possible chances of aspiration for it.
So aspirate by the post-op. So what would be the process of post-op aspiration? Kasi kung if you stop, I know, stable, diba? Yung algorithm mo, stable, safe, for the patient to the ward. So I'm assuming, sabi mo kanina, intraop ang remarkable, diba? Nakabago yung patient mo. So it was the patient who intubated. indication.
From what I understood ko, the main reason was the risk for subsequent aspirations.
So you were thinking of a repeat aspiration of
methods of prevention. Traditionally, patients who were scheduled for elective procedures requiring sedation, regional anesthesia or general anesthesia were instructed to remain on NPO after midnight to promote an empty stomach to decrease the risk of regurgitation. Based on evidence that allowing ingestion of clear liquids 2 to 4 hours before surgery resulted in lower gastric volumes and higher gastric pH, the ASA published practice guidelines for preoperative fasting and the use of pharmacological agents to reduce the risk of pulmonary aspiration. So for clear liquids up to 2 hours before beginning elective procedures requiring anesthesia, the guidelines were also updated in 2017 recommending 4 hours of fasting from breast milk and 6 hours of fasting from solid foods, infant formula, and non-human milk. And then lastly, fried or fatty foods may require longer fasting times of 8 hours or more. However, there are exceptions to these rules, such as emergency surgeries, which must begin regardless of the duration of fasting. For such cases, use of rapid sequence induction is recommended. For the routine use of drugs to prevent pulmonary aspiration is not advised, but they are effective when used in patients with risk factors for pulmonary aspiration. Several agents with varying mechanisms of action are available, seen in this table. In addition, the routine use of drugs as prophylaxis against aspiration pneumonitis is also not recommended by the ASA, but was noted to be beneficial in patients with specific risk factors for aspiration, such as full stomach, symptomatic gastroesophageal reflux disease, hiatal hernia, and the presence of esophageal tube, morbid obesity, diabetic gastroparesis, or pregnancy. So for the entirety or goal of aspiration prophylaxis is twofold: to decrease gastric volume and to increase gastric fluid pH. Commonly used agents include non-particulate antacids such as sodium citrate, pro-motility drugs such as metoclopramide and H2 receptor antagonists. These drugs may be used alone or in combination. So, summary of the discussion. We have in the first part, patients at risk of aspiration. We have full stomach, patients with DM, with peripheral neuropathy, plus clinically significant gastroenteritis disease, and hernia, pregnancy, acute pain or acute opiate therapy, and then bowel obstruction, intra-abdominal process, trauma, or unknown timing of last meal. So methods to reduce aspirations risk: we have adequate preoperative fasting, clear liquids only if necessary, increase gastric emptying, reduce gastric volume and acidity, airway protection such as rapid placement of cup PTT after induction, liquid pressure is also recommended to avoid controversial. Summary of preoperative fasting recommendations as discussed earlier. So for the conclusion, the assessment and recognition of risk factors for pulmonary aspiration is a basic fundamental aspect of anesthetic training and practice. Learning from research and case studies should reduce these risks by reinforcing the need for rapid modification of airway management. Emergency anesthesia on its own is a simple important risk factor of pulmonary aspiration. However, awake extubation in the lateral position is also recommended if aspiration risk is present. Second generation of blood culture devices may be superior to first generation devices, but ultimately rapid sequence tracheal intubation remains the most supported. For the references, you have Barash the following.
Good afternoon po, Doctor. So I'm Kylie Bor, Harvard resident, to present a case management on bronchoscopy, mediastinoscopy, and paracoscopy. So my objective is to present a case of flexible bronchoscopy, to understand the indications and types of bronchoscopy, mediastinoscopy, and paracoscopy, to anticipate and plan for airway management challenges and perioperative complications, and to choose the appropriate anesthetic technique for each procedure. So for the case, this is a case of a 34-year-old male diagnosed with acute respiratory failure type 2 secondary to pulmonary tuberculosis bronchiectasis and tuberculous emphysema. So the surgical plan is for flexible bronchoscopy, and the anesthetic plan is general endotracheal anesthesia. So the patient was diagnosed with pulmonary tuberculosis in December 2024, and this is already a recurrent diagnosis. The patient already had tuberculosis in 2015 and 2022, status quo 6 months of HRZE. And at this time, patient was on ongoing treatment with HRZE as well. He's a 10-pack-year smoker with no other known comorbids, no previous surgery, and no previous anesthetic experience. So the patient's labs were all within normal limits. The ABG shows a compensated metabolic alkalosis with more than adequate oxygenation. So on the chest X-ray, it shows partial heterogeneous opacities in the right lung, ascribed to PTB or pneumonia, with associated cavitary formation in the right mid-lung, which remains stable. Then the patient also has massive atelectasis on the left lung with underlying lung pathologies cannot be ruled out. Chest CT with contrast also shows findings in both lungs, slightly infectious in etiology of PTB with cavitary formation, with massive left lung atelectasis, left hydrothorax, and emphysema. So on physical examination, patient was seen in the ICU. Patient was awake and intubated, GCS 11, E4, BP, and M6. He follows commands and not in distress at this time. On PE, significant finding would be the decreased breath sounds on the left lung. So the patient weighs 55 kilograms with a height of 165 with a normal BMI of 20.2 with an allowable blood loss of 780 millimeter, classified as ASA 4E, and the patient was already intubated, and patient is had a pulmonary clearance of high risk. And these are his medications. So the anesthetic plan for this patient is to do general anesthesia, and we plan to reintubate the patient using larger endotracheal tube, since at this time the patient the patient's endotracheal tube was only a size 7.5, and the IM service also requested to reintubate the patient with either a size 8 or a size 8.5. So the planned agents were fentanyl, propofol, roperamine, and oxygen with sevoflurane to maintain. So at the operating room, patient was seen awake, intubated, hooked to standard monitors, and hooked to O2 support with mechanical ventilator, with stable vital signs and O2 status 100%. So proceeded with induction with fentanyl 75 micrograms IV, propofol 100 mg IV, and sevoflurane was started at peak volume percent. Propofol 30 mg IV was given, and manual ventilation was done for 5 minutes. So reintubation was done using a radiolaryngoscope. Once the current endotracheal tube was visualized, the endotracheal tube was removed and a size 8 tube was inserted, cuff inflated at level 20 cm, and still decreased breath sounds were noted on the left, and Edgar reading at this time was 45. So a swivel adapter was placed between the tube and the breathing circuit, and the procedure started. So a flexible bronchoscope was inserted by the swivel adapter, and during the procedure, vital signs, including the O2 saturation, were closely monitored. So the procedure lasted around 17 minutes with of vital signs of blood pressure of 100 to 110 over 60 to 70, heart rate of 90 to 100, and O2 saturation from 90 to 99 to 100%, and no desaturation episodes noted during the procedure. So the final diagnosis was massive hemoptysis, secondary to post-TB bronchiectasis, and acute respiratory failure type 2. So for the discussion, so bronchoscopy is a technique used to visualize the air passages with a small camera that is located at the end of the tube. So it could be, types of bronchoscope could be the flexible perioperative bronchoscope and a rigid bronchoscope. So flexible fiber optic bronchoscopy, such as the one usually used in our institution, could be used for diagnostic or therapeutic procedures. So indications could include mechanical problems of the neck, upper lobe and peripheral lesions, limited hemoptysis, during mechanical ventilation, positioning of double lumen tubes, difficult intubation, checking of position of the indication tube, and in bronchial blocking. So for the anesthetic techniques that can be applied during flexible bronchoscopy, first would be local anesthesia. So local anesthesia allows examination of vocal cord movement. So topical anesthesia could be applied through nebulizer, handheld aerosols, or soap flagels. And the most commonly used local anesthetics are lidocaine or tetracaine. So nerve blocks could also be done, such as laryngeal or nasopharyngeal nerve block. Also, pre-treatment with a drying agent could also be given. Drying agents such as glycopyrrolate to decrease the secretions. And also the administration of a local anesthetic through the bronchoscope, such as a spray as you go technique, can be done with or without sedation. So another anesthetic technique that can be employed, such as in the case presented, would be general anesthesia. So this could be done with either spontaneous or positive pressure ventilation with or without muscle relaxation. So a cortex swivel connector with a self-sealing valve is inserted between the circuit and the tracheal tube to facilitate ventilation and manipulation of the bronchoscope. So an inhalation and or intravenous anesthetic can be used, and for the case presented, inhalational anesthetic was used. So, but between the two, intravenous anesthetic avoids contamination of the operating room or the environment with the inhaled agents. And again, anticholinergics such as glycopyrrolate can be used to ensure a dry field to optimize visualization. So this is the swivel adapter that we usually use in cases of, when we do cases of bronchoscopy. So in general anesthesia, the tracheal tube or a laryngeal mask can be used. So the advantage of an LME over an endotracheal tube would be that there is visualization of vocal cords and the subtonic structures. And there's also lower airway resistance. And it is the safest method in patients with difficult airway when maintaining spontaneous respiration. So the next type of bronchoscopy would be a rigid bronchoscopy. So this usually necessitates general anesthesia since the risk of tracheal trauma is high with coughing. So similar to flexible bronchoscopy, anticholinergic agents are also used before manipulation of the airway to decrease the secretions during bronchoscopy. And in pediatric patients, this is most commonly performed with spontaneous ventilation, while for adults, this is commonly performed with intravenous anesthesia and the use of muscle relaxants. So rigid bronchoscopy is considered a technique of choice in the following scenarios. So preoperative diagnostic assessment of airway obstruction involving the trachea, therapy of massive hemoptysis, foreign bodies in the airway, dilation of tracheal stenosis, vascular tumors, small children, and endobronchial secretions. So in these type of procedures, we need to take note that there could be difficulty with monitoring the O2 saturation, the end-tidal CO2, and the amount of volatile anesthetics that is given. So pulsatility is vital due to the high risk of the saturation, and the airways remain essentially open to atmosphere. And in prolonged procedures, repeated ABG is done to confirm the adequate ventilation. And it is also possible to interrupt the surgery and ventilate with a standard circuit in the mask or in the tracheal tube to assess the ETCO. There's also potential for aspiration since the airway is never completely secure. So complications include airway perforation, mucosal damage, hemorrhage, post-manipulation airway edema, and potential airway blockage. So there are multiple methods of ventilation management for rigid bronchoscopy. First is the spontaneous ventilation, which is addition of topical anesthesia or nerve blocks to the airway decreases the tendency to breath hold and cough. Next would be apneic oxygenation. This requires thorough pre-oxygenation. The anesthesiologist will have to interrupt surgery to ventilate the patient before desaturation occurs, and this allows working intervals of 3 minutes or longer. Next would be positive pressure ventilation via a ventilating bronchoscope. This uses the standard anesthetic circuit but may cause significant air leaks. Then lastly is a jet ventilation, which can be performed with a handheld injector such as the Sandwich injector or with a high-frequency ventilator. And this technique is most useful with intravenous anesthesia. Next type of procedure is mediastinoscopy. So this is the traditional method to evaluate mediastinal lymph nodes in non-small cell lung cancer staging. So this will also be used for diagnosis of anterior or superior mediastinal masses. So there are types of mediastinoscopy. First will be the cervical mediastinoscopy, wherein a small transverse incision in the midline of the lower neck in the suprasternal notch is done, while a parasternal or anterior mediastinoscopy, a small incision made through the intercondylar spaces or the spaces of the excised second costal cartilage is done. So anesthetic management for cervical mediastinoscopy could either be a local anesthesia or through general anesthesia with a single lumen tube. So with local anesthesia, this can be done if the patient is cooperative and is cooperative with a compromised airway. But for patients with coughing or patients who are uncooperative with movement, general anesthesia with a single lumen tube is preferred. So complications for this procedure include first is hemorrhage, which is the most common and severe complication, since there is due to the close proximity to the vessels and vascularity of the tumors. So thoracotomy or median sternotomy to achieve hemostasis may be done. And induced arterial hypotension is also done in severe bleeding, and fluids given in an upper limb vein may enter the mediastinum. So other potential complications include pneumothorax, air obstruction, compression of the innominate artery, recurrent laryngeal nerve paralysis, ischemic nerve injury, esophageal injury, chylothorax, or air embolism. So another complication I mentioned was compression of the innominate artery. So in this case, there is reduced blood flow in the right subclavian artery, right vertebral artery, and the right common carotid artery. So this could result in a factitious cardiac arrest, wherein there is absence of radial pulse and pulse excreting from the right hand. So this indicates repositioning of the mediastinal flow. So it is important to monitor the pulse in the right arm, since this could also monitor if there is compression of the innominate artery. And the non-invasive blood pressure cuff should be placed on the left arm. So last procedure will be thoracoscopy. So this is a procedure wherein there is insertion of an endoscope within the thoracic cavity and pleural spaces. This is used to diagnose pleural diseases, effusions, infectious diseases, staging procedures, chemical fluorimesis, and lung biopsy. So this may be performed using local, regional, or general anesthesia. So it depends on the duration of the procedure and physical status of the patient. So in regional anesthesia, an intercostal block will be done, and an additional stereo ganglion block can be done to suppress the cough reflex. While for local anesthesia, spontaneous pneumothorax is usually well tolerated, and if procedure is poorly tolerated, then we can shift to general anesthesia. So for general anesthesia, a double lumen tube is usually preferred, and positive pressure ventilation via a single lumen tube would interfere with endoscopic visualization. So this is during disease, A DLT allows for the expansion of the lung and avoids pain associated with installation. That's the last one.
Good afternoon, everyone. Diana Daphne SJO, first year anesthesia resident. And I'll be reporting the journal of Rizal on bronchoscopy. So for my objectives, to critically appraise a journal article about the anesthetic management of bronchoscopy in adult patients and to determine the validity and applicability of the findings in the journal article in the clinical setting. So again, for the clinical scenario, we have a JG, 34-year-old male, a known case of pulmonary tuberculosis with increasing hemoptysis and dyspnea. A case of acute respiratory failure type 2 secondary to PTB, bronchiectasis, tuberculosis, empyema, and for emergency bronchoscopy under general anesthesia. So for the literature search, I used the keywords general anesthesia, moderate sedation, and bronchoscopy. And I used for this journal a randomization study of comfort during bronchoscopy, comparing conscious sedation and anesthetic controlled general anesthesia, including the utility of bispectral index monitoring. So for my clinical questions, in adult patients with acute respiratory failure secondary to PTB, bronchiectasis, and empyema undergoing bronchoscopy, how does general anesthesia compare to moderate deep sedation in terms of patient's comfort, safety, diagnostic yield, and complication rates? So does the study provide a direct answer to your clinical question in terms of patient's exposure, intervention, and outcome of interest? So for my population, so in the clinical question, again, JG, a 34-year-old male, undergoing bronchoscopy under general anesthesia, and in the journal I chose po, adult patients undergoing diagnostic bronchoscopy. So for the exposure or intervention, so from the clinical question, performed under general anesthesia, comparing it to the journal, under general anesthesia with or without the bispectral index monitor. So for the comparison, for both, performed under moderate to deep sedation or under conscious sedation. And for the outcomes, yes po, yung general anesthesia. Yung yes. Parang both po. Yung patient comfort dog, yung tolerability, safety, kina-compare po if mas okay po siya if under general anesthesia or yung conscious sedation lang po. po versus conscious sedation din po. Under general anesthesia din po and versus under conscious sedation din po. Yung sa urine. Yes po. So, compare po. Both din po ma'am. General anesthesia and conscious sedation. May rules po. Yes. 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 Same way. Yes. Yes. Was the assignment of patients to treatment randomized? So to answer this po, yes. Subjects were randomized prior to any anesthetic review to either conscious sedation or general anesthesia. So were all the patients who entered the trial properly accounted for and attributed at its conclusion? So again, yes. Yung RCT therapy. Yes. Yes po. Yes po. During the study period po, 260 patients were considered for enrollment. And 96 were available for randomization. The most common reason for exclusion was non-availability of the patients on the 2 days of the week when anesthesia were present if necessary after randomization. So there were 50 subjects that were allocated to the conscious sedation arm, while 46 were allocated to the general anesthesia arm. 1 and 2 subjects were lost to follow-up in the conscious sedation arm and the general anesthesia arm, respectively. So were patients, third clinicians, and study personnel blind to the treatment. So the procedure type was actually not blinded. However, both the procedure and the procedural and anesthetic staff, they were blinded to the bispectral index monitoring data during the procedure. So in this trial, the blinding was limited and not fully achievable. So the authors noted that the subject blinding wasn't practical, since sedation type, the general anesthesia versus conscious sedation inherently differs, and patients could perceive whether they were under general anesthesia. So were the groups similar at the start of the treatment? So again, yes. So the characteristic of the treatment groups are presented in this table. So there were no significant differences in terms of age, sex, comorbidity index, pre and post-procedure emotional state score, or final diagnosis between the groups. Both groups were comparable in terms of the procedure type and the comorbidities. So aside from the experimental intervention, were the groups treated equally? So yes, the groups were treated equally in terms of the bronchoscopy procedure, the monitoring, assessment, and follow-up. All patients underwent flexible bronchoscopy performed by experienced bronchoscopists using the same equipment and techniques, performed in the same bronchoscopy unit under similar environment and staffing conditions. Both groups received standard monitoring, so they were all hooked to an ECG monitor, oxygen saturation, and with blood pressure monitoring. So the comfort levels, procedural ease, and recovery times were assessed using the same scales and timing. All patients were also monitored post-bronchoscopy and was discharged.